Good evening, welcome to a briefing outside broadcast from Berwick, the ancient and embattled border town which has changed its nationality at least a dozen times. It's been English now for 500 years. Kevin Rowntree's been taking a look at it in 1982. In a moment we'll hear from our guests in the Trinity Hall, Berwick. That's after the first of Kevin Rowntree's film reports on the town.
Really, there should be more amenities for the young, of course. There isn't any, really, at the moment.
There's not that much to do here, you know. It's kind of quiet.
As a town, it's very nice, but by the time you come to the weekends and the evenings, there's nothing much for the young to do. It's all sort of holiday-maker geared, if you know what I mean.
It may well be 500 years since Berwick switched back once again to being English, but the influence of nearby Scotland strongly lingers on. Elizabeth I described Berwick as the chief key in her realm. In 1982, Berwick's a town with problems, some shared with other northern towns, others unique to Berwick.
It's in a pretty poor state, to be truthful. We've had this recession. It's been prolonged for 18 months to 2 years now, and I think really that the town itself lacks the drive and the correct people in the correct places to progress. I think this is the crux of the matter, really, that we have a poor council. They do very little to encourage enterprise, and I think that they could do very much more than they have done over the last 5-6 years.
Unemployment runs high, but it doesn't always show realistically in the figures because the unemployed young largely move out in search of work. But if the dole queue remains, at least this sort of queue will become a thing of the past next year. Heavy traffic overcrowding the town centre, and to make matters worse, broken down. 1983 sees the arrival of the Berwick bypass. Amongst other things, it should make the town a good deal more attractive to tourists. Although whether the number of visitors will increase is hard to tell. One complaint is that the town never properly features in official tourist literature, and some say that's because Berwick doesn't have a tourism focal point, such as a castle. Of course, it did have a well-used castle at one time, till they built the railway line right through the middle. The train, now arriving at platform 2, is on the site of the Great Hall of Berwick's former castle, where the entire English Parliament once met in 1292 to hear the claim of Robert de Bruce to the Scottish crown. But what about Berwick and holidaymakers in 1982? One camping site alone attracts 8,000 during the summer. Does Berwick and its councillors really cater for them?
No, not at all. Not at all. They're so parochial in their attitude. Gaymen, for instance, I've had problems, as you're aware, regarding a recent application regarding gaymen. There's several people had the same problem. You've got to realise that the type of people who are coming to these sites are coming for a mixture of what the area has to offer. We cannot guarantee sunshine, but we can guarantee them a holiday, providing we can provide the facilities that they require. And it's really wrong to say that gaymen, such as fruit machines, leisure activities, are totally out of character within this town. And I firmly believe that until people who are representative of the borough and representative of ratepayers get the grips with us, then we'll be static. We'll never move from the spot.
As a historic town, Berwick has no fewer than 400 buildings listed as being of special importance and interest. Many of them had got into a bad state before the inception of the Berwick Town Preservation Trust. It buys an old house, refurbishes to a very high standard with the aid of grants, and then sells the building to offset the costs, sometimes being criticised in the process for selling them off too cheaply. One like this, for instance, went to a doctor for a mere £30,000.
Yes, this is a criticism that's been levelled many times, and lately the department have said that they thought perhaps we had been too lavish in the renovation of houses. But having said that, we've been trying to preserve something inside the town, something that would be in keeping. And the money market here will not allow us to charge what would be realistic perhaps down south somewhere. £30,000 here is perhaps equivalent to about 50,000 further down.
I mean, is it a blessing or a disadvantage in a town like Berwick to have so many historic listed buildings on your hands?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about it. It's a distinct disadvantage, but it's something that we've learned to live with and we're trying to put right. But there's such a backlog of decay behind the facade of the street, some of our streets, that it's a very, very difficult problem.
The rot isn't just confined to the town centre. The quayside, deserted, dangerous, threatens to disintegrate and vanish into the sea. It's a silent reminder of more prosperous days when Berwick had its own fishing fleet. It was the Scots who modernised their ports, which caused the entire Berwick fishing fleet to weigh anchor and move up to Weymouth, just a few miles away across the Scottish border. Responsibility for the crumbling quayside lies with the Berwick Harbour Commissioners.
We've been trying, to my knowledge, for 10 years to get some assistance from the Department of the Environment, but they come back with the same answer every time: I'm sorry, there's no money. With very limited financial resources, the Harbour Commission has to look after a very large area of an estuary which was originally developed over 100 years ago. And our revenue is such that we have to give priority to such as the pier. We have a statutory duty to maintain the river free for navigation and to make as commercial a success of the port as we can. We're currently facing a quotation for repairs that are urgently needed now, which will amount to considerably more than our annual income.
The problems of the Port of Berwick, revolving around the lack of money, show no immediate signs of improving, although more ships using the river could bring in more revenue. So what's being done to increase traffic?
In the last few years, we've had between 150 and 200 boats, although the recession in the construction industry has cut a lot away from us because we have a gravel quay, and the number of gravel boats has been drastically reduced over the last 2 or 3 years.
So what, if anything, would you like to see happen?
Well, I'd like to see more use of the port by local merchants for the export and import of grain, if possible. I'd like to see us, if we could, get more of other materials in, but it is very difficult when we're competing with ports which aren't tidal and which can take bigger boats.
It seems that a common problem for all towns of great age and beauty, like Berwick, is first a lack of money to put right what has gone wrong, to cure dilapidation, and second a conflict of interests between necessary development and preservation of what is beauty. I wonder if I could come to you, Mike MacDonald. Should some restrictions be lifted in order to allow developments that others would bring to the town and bring in extra money, extra prosperity?
I don't think that at the moment there are necessary restrictions placed on any development coming in. It is all looked at in a full and proper way by the councils. I don't think there are restrictions because it's a historic town.
Would there be objections to, for instance, as we heard on that film, the installation of jukeboxes, videos, that kind of entertainment?
Well, the Berwick already has that sort of entertainment in the centre of the town. And I don't think there would be necessary objections if further applications were made, but proper application.
How much of a problem is this? I mean, do you weigh the balance of what kind of development that you want here to draw in tourists? You already draw in something like, what, 75,000 tourists a year?
Yes, a lot of tourists are attracted to the town and to the surrounding countryside. So that is obviously something that's considered by the Development Committee when looking at development proposals.
George Scott, is it something that worries you as Mayor of Berwick?
Well, I think that certainly the getting the balance right is quite a difficult problem. I mean, we get so many tourists in Berwick because it is unique, because it has the walls, because it has the old streets. And the council is usually criticised very often the other way for permitting development where large sections would not like to see development take place. I think it's a very, very difficult job to get the balance right. And each planning application is judged on its merits and judged individually, and that's what we do on the council. And we don't claim to be always right, but we do give every planning application due consideration.
Are there people here who believe that the planning restrictions in Berwick are too severe? Clearly not. You're obviously doing a very good job. But there is a conflict, is there not?
Indeed there is. And it's all the time you've got to balance up the two things. And it's very difficult because obviously we've been trying in Berwick, for example, over the past few years to get industry into the place. Now, because of the change in the government grant system and things like that, perhaps tourism is going to become more and more important. And so the balance has slightly changed now, perhaps, to seeing the development in that way. But obviously, all the time, we're trying to get the balance correct. I don't accept the criticism that was made that the council are not enterprising. They have tried in many ways to get things here and gone to great lengths, for example, to get industry here. And it isn't easy to attract industry to a place like Berwick.
What about the question of there being so many listed buildings in Berwick that the risk is they're sold off too cheaply?
Well, as was mentioned on the screen there a few moments ago, we have the constraint made upon us or put upon us by the charter commissioners when it comes to selling. We have to get an independent valuation of the building before we're allowed to sell it. Having said that, we advertise very widely both sides of the border, and then we have to sell on the market which is available. And in that case, I'm afraid it's just a fact that the money is not forthcoming in this part of the country.
Isn't that something of a shock to you?
Well, it's a disappointment, but something that we have in this part of the world learned to live with.
What does Berwick lack industrially that people perhaps feel it should have? In what ways ought it to develop? Are there any people here who feel that perhaps it should attract industries to the town, that it isn't doing enough to bring in the new technologies and the kind of industries that will ensure its survival?
I would certainly say that Berwick isn't doing enough in its fight to attract industries here. But by the same token, it has been held up an awful lot in its efforts because it recently lost its status as a special development area, for instance. And yet it has to compete with the Scots across the border who benefit from all the marvellous benefits that come from the Scottish Development Agency. Certainly, in that respect, we're not being helped. But by the same token, we don't do a great deal to help ourselves, I think. We seem to put too much emphasis on tourism and forget that that tourism in itself does very little to help the man in the street as far as filling his pockets up when he's jobless.
Do you feel, in a sense, as someone said to us when we were here a week or so ago, that Berwick is too far north and it's also too far south?
I would fully agree with that statement, yes. Indeed, a lot of the townsfolk, and when I say townsfolk, I would across the river into Tweedmouth and Spittal. Spittal, a very important part of the Berwick complex, that indeed some of them really don't know exactly what nationality they are.
Well, we'll come to that later in the programme. David Conway, as a teacher and also somebody involved with the local authority, what do you believe can be done to attract industry to the town, the kind of industry that will give the youngsters coming from your school a chance?
One of the things I find that is lacking in the town, it's not necessarily the fault of the town, it's a general economic one, is that there's no industry which will keep the brighter young people in the town. We do quite well on employment in general. We have been doing. Now, of course, we are suffering from unemployment. But it is always the case that the kind of youngsters who will occupy executive positions, managerial positions, or like the future technocrats, they have to go elsewhere for their careers. And this is a thing we sadly lack. And I would have thought also that there might be a place for it, because high technology industry makes products that are valuable in relation to their weight, very valuable in relation to the cost it takes to get them to the market. And therefore, that's the very kind of industry that would survive in Berwick.
How long do you think you could take to achieve that? Because while you're not doing it, the young children, and particularly the more able ones, are draining away from this community.
You can't, I don't think you can quantify it. One moment we wring our hands in regret, the next minute we may be throwing them in the air for joy because some firm has seen the attractions of Berwick and come. I don't think it's forecastable.
George Scott.
No, I was thinking that it is true that the well-qualified young people go away. I think that Berwick's geographical position has a lot to do with that. When you said that it was too far north and too far south, in fact, that in some cases is true. It makes the job of attracting industry to the place all the more difficult. But I certainly think that we have to be ever vigilant to see that we can attract those industries and make sure that if anybody comes along with ideas, then we're open to the ideas that they have. And certainly we want this to be so.
Have people come along with those ideas? Have they been helped?
Yes, yes, indeed. We have very good relationships with the Development Commission, whose chairman, in fact, lives in our own area. And over the years, we have been open to the suggestions that the Development Commission have brought. And we're constantly in touch with them to try and get new ideas for the place. For example, they have said that we can still give rent-free periods in factories, which is difficult at the moment because we're not a special area. And we continually are open to the suggestions that the Development Commission are making. And we try all the time to make sure that if they've got any good, new, fresh ideas, then we listen to them and try and put them into practice.
So several people have said that the very geography of Berwick is one of its innate problems, that it's difficult to attract industry, and yet you're getting a bypass, as we saw, which will improve road communication, and you've got first-class rail services. Is this really still a serious problem?
Well, obviously, that it's a great advantage to have those things, and we're jolly grateful for them, and we hope that they